300 million years ago, the very air you breathe would have killed you. Oxygen filled more than a third of Earth's atmosphere, a concentration so volatile that damp forests could explode into firestorms with a single spark. In this world, dragonflies grew wings as wide as hawks, scorpions stretched nearly 3 feet long, and millipedes the length of crocodiles ruled the forest floor. The giants were not myths. Their fossils lie waiting, proof of a planet where the rules of life were rewritten by air itself. But this abundance was fragile, a paradise balanced on fire and decay, destined to collapse in silence. What 35% oxygen did to life on Earth was both wondrous and terrifying. Prepare to breathe in a story of monsters, forests, and flames, a tale written in the sky itself. We begin. Imagine standing in a world that feels both familiar and alien, where the very air presses upon you like a living presence. The forests are dark and endless, their trunks rising like pillars into a ceiling of tangled green. Yet what strikes you first is not the sight of the towering trees, nor the sound of unseen wings thrumming overhead. It is the air itself. It feels heavy, dense, almost intoxicating. With each breath you take, your lungs fill with more fire than they are prepared for. You are no longer breathing the 21% oxygen of our modern Earth. Instead, you inhale an atmosphere swollen to nearly 35% oxygen, a chemical shift so profound that it reshaped the destiny of life itself. This is Earth, more than 300 million years ago, during a span of time we call the Carboniferous. It is a name that speaks of carbon locked into stone, of forests buried and coal seams laid down like pages in the planet's archive. But beneath that geological title lies something stranger, a world whose very air was charged with potential. To live in such an atmosphere was to breathe fuel, to strike a spark was to summon a firestorm, to crawl or fly within it was to push the limits of what life could be. The stakes of this transformation cannot be overstated. Oxygen is not just another gas, it is a paradox made visible in breath. In small amounts, it is life's ally, powering the cells of animals, giving us endurance, shaping the dance of muscle and motion. In excess, it becomes corrosive, a force of destruction, stripping electrons, burning too fast. On ancient Earth, oxygen leapt from the ordinary into the extraordinary. With every rise in its concentration, the rules of biology bent toward a different future. We sometimes imagine Earth as stable, its conditions set and familiar, yet the Carboniferous reveals otherwise. For tens of millions of years, oxygen was not fixed at our present value, but surged upward like a tide. Geologists and paleobotanists trace this rise to the lush swamp forests that spread across the supercontinent. Their endless mats of club mosses, horsetails, and towering lycopsids acted as vast factories of oxygen, pumping it into the sky. These plants produced immense amounts of lignin, a tough, woody substance, but at this time, no microbe or fungus yet possessed the enzymes to break it down efficiently. So when trees fell, they did not rot in the way we would expect today. Instead, they piled up in soggy swamps, pressed into the ground, burying carbon and leaving oxygen behind. The balance tilted year by year toward hyperoxia, oxygen-rich air. The result was an atmosphere unlike anything we know. At its peak, nearly 1/3 of every breath was oxygen. To give this scale, modern firefighting laboratories show that above 25% oxygen, flames can leap explosively from even damp wood. At 35%, a lightning strike in a Carboniferous forest would have been a catastrophe. Fires roaring through the undergrowth, consuming peat and canopy alike. These fires would scar the landscape, clear openings, and in their aftermath, forests would regrow only to be threatened again. In this way, the very richness of the air created a cycle of both abundance and destruction. But oxygen is not only a story of fire, it is also the breath that gave rise to giants. Imagine a dragonfly settling near you, its body the length of your forearm, its wings stretching wider than a hawk's. This is Meganeura, one of the aerial titans of the Carboniferous. Imagine too the shadows of creatures moving across the damp ground, millipede-like forms stretching over 2.5 meters in length. their segmented bodies undulating as they search the leaf litter. This is Arthropleura, the largest invertebrate ever known to walk the earth. Both of these creatures, and countless others, found their size not merely permitted, but enabled by oxygen's abundance. Their simple respiratory systems, spiracles leading into tracheal tubes, depended on diffusion. In today's thinner atmosphere, such systems limit insect size. In the hyperoxic Carboniferous, they were freed from that constraint, yet science never rests on a single explanation. While hyperoxia is the leading theory for gigantism, debates remain alive. Some researchers argue that insect flight, though assisted by oxygen, must also contend with gravity, wing structure, and the dense vegetation of the forests. Others suggest that predator-prey dynamics, arms races between hunters and hunted, also pressured body sizes upward. What is clear is that oxygen played a starring role, whether as main actor or as stage light, illuminating new possibilities for evolution. And so this ancient atmosphere becomes more than a curiosity. It is a reminder of how fragile the balance is between life and its environment. For when oxygen rose, creatures expanded into forms that would be impossible today. When oxygen later fell, these giants vanished. The breath of Earth was both their sculptor and their executioner. Oddities emerge when we probe deeper. For example, not all life prospered in this oxygen-rich air. Some microbes found themselves poisoned by the very abundance that fed larger organisms. Too much oxygen can damage DNA, disrupt metabolic pathways, corrode the delicate machinery of life. Even for the great insects and arthropods, hyperoxia may have been both blessing and curse. Laboratory studies with modern insects reveal that while they grow larger in oxygen-rich environments, their lifespans may shorten, their bodies more prone to oxidative stress. Could the Carboniferous giants have lived brief, intense lives, burning bright on oxygen's gift only to fade quickly? The fossil record is silent, leaving us to wonder. The debate extends even to fire. Some scientists suggest that wildfires acted as a stabilizing force. By consuming oxygen-rich forests, they returned balance to the atmosphere, keeping oxygen from climbing even higher. Others argue the feedback loops were more complex, involving shifts in rainfall, soil chemistry, and the slow creep of continents. This uncertainty is not weakness, it is the pulse of science itself. Every fossil leaf and charred log becomes a clue in a mystery still unsolved. To walk in imagination through these forests is to feel the world itself breathing differently. Each gust of wind carries not only the scent of damp moss and decay, but the hidden weight of chemistry. Every organism is shaped by that chemistry. Wings broadened, bodies elongated, metabolisms tuned to an atmosphere now lost. The Carboniferous is not simply an ancient chapter. It is a revelation that life is written in air as much as in stone, and we too are bound to this truth. The breath you take right now, steady and invisible, is the descendant of those ages. Coal seams beneath our feet are the carbon tombs of forests that once powered the oxygen surge. Flames that crackle in a fireplace carry echoes of wildfires that once swept across swampy continents. And the balance of 21% oxygen that surrounds us is not permanent. It is the outcome of a billion-year dialogue between life and atmosphere. As we leave this first glimpse of a hyperoxic Earth, we carry the awareness that oxygen is not a backdrop but a protagonist. It can raise forests, sculpt giants, ignite worlds, and extinguish them. In the next breath of our journey, we will sink deeper into the green cathedrals that created this atmospheric miracle. The forests whose silent labor changed not only their own destiny but ours. Step beneath the canopy of the Carboniferous world, and the air grows damp, heavy, and alive with the perfume of moss, resin, and decay. The light of the sun does not strike the ground directly. It filters through towering stalks and fronds that rise like living skyscrapers. Around you, the swamp stretches in every direction, an endless labyrinth of roots and pools where shadows tremble with the whisper of wings and the ripple of unseen bodies moving below the water's surface. The earth itself is a greenhouse, and you walk at the feet of forests so immense they seem to hold up the sky. These are not forests of oaks and pines, nor anything we might know from our time. They are dominated by lycopsids, ancient relatives of the club moss, now reduced to small creeping plants in our meadows, but then titans. They soared 30 meters into the air, their trunks sheathed in diamond-patterned bark, their crowns bursting into clusters of spore-bearing leaves. Alongside them grew calamites, reed-like trees as tall as buildings, and giant horsetails whose segmented stalks reached high above the swamp floor. Beneath their shade, ferns unfurled like sails, and seed ferns, the first steps toward modern flowering plants, spread their broad leaves to capture the heavy light. This was Earth's first great empire of trees, and like all empires, it had consequences. These forests transformed the atmosphere not only by existing but by dying. Each season, leaves and branches fell in abundance, sinking into the anoxic swamps. When storms toppled trunks, they did not rot away as they would today. Instead, they sank, slowly buried under layers of sediment and peat. The secret lay in lignin, the complex polymer that gave their bark and wood such strength. At this time, no fungi or microbes had yet evolved enzymes powerful enough to break lignin down on a large scale. What could not be eaten, burned, or decomposed simply lingered, and as carbon was trapped, sealed away underground, oxygen accumulated in the sky. We must pause here to feel the strangeness of that chemical equation. Imagine billions of tons of carbon, the very substance of life, locked beneath the soil, pressed into seams that one day would become coal. For every atom buried, a breath of oxygen was left behind. It is as though the Earth itself began to exhale more deeply, filling the atmosphere with reserves that life could draw upon. In this way, the forests did not just decorate the planet, they altered its fundamental chemistry. They created the breath that reshaped evolution. The scale of this burial is staggering. The Carboniferous period is the reason our world still carries such vast reserves of coal. Entire mountain ranges are threaded with seams that are the compressed ghosts of these swamp forests. The very name Carboniferous, meaning coal-bearing, honors this legacy. And yet in their own age, these forests could never have known what destiny their fallen bodies carried. They built a future by accident, laying down energy that would ignite human civilization millions of years later. But here in their prime, these forests were engines of oxygen. They pumped the sky full of it, raising concentrations to levels no large animal could tolerate today. And in doing so, they also created new dangers. With every increase in oxygen came an increase in fire. Even damp wood, even green leaves, became tinder in this atmosphere. A single lightning strike could ignite whole swamps, sending walls of flame roaring through the undergrowth. Some scientists believe that fires acted as a kind of planetary regulator, burning back the forests before oxygen levels climbed even higher. The very success of these forests may have summoned their greatest enemy, fire born of their own breath. Speculation lingers over how these ecosystems endured. Could the constant presence of wildfires have shaped their composition? Perhaps the dominance of fast-growing plants like lycopsids was no accident. They grew quickly, spread widely, and reproduced by spores, traits that would allow them to reclaim ground again and again after each inferno. In this way, the forests may have been locked in an eternal cycle of burning and rebirth, with oxygen as both blessing and curse. Yet debates remain open. Some researchers argue that rainfall patterns, driven by shifting continents, were as important as oxygen in shaping the fate of these forests. Others suggest that the lack of herbivores capable of devouring them allowed vegetation to spread unchecked, feeding oxygen's rise even more. The truth may lie in the overlap of many forces: climate, biology, geology, and chance, all interwoven into the fabric of deep time. Odd details haunt the fossil record. We find stumps of lycopsid trees preserved upright, their hollow interiors sometimes filled with the bones of amphibians that fell inside and were trapped. We find forests frozen in place, their trunks still rooted in ancient soils, as if a single moment of burial preserved them for eternity. These are not only scientific clues, they are echoes of an alien landscape. To imagine standing there is to enter a cathedral of green, vast and silent, except for the chorus of insects, the croak of early amphibians, and the distant roar of flames when fire inevitably returned. To walk among these trees was to move through the very machinery of Earth's transformation. Each towering trunk was a pump, each fallen branch a sacrifice. Slowly, inevitably, these forests bent the atmosphere to their will. The sky became richer, stranger, heavier. Creatures that breathed this air were changed by it, some growing larger than any of their descendants, others succumbing to the oxidative stress that too much oxygen inflicted. And so in these forests, we glimpse the paradox of abundance. What they gave was not simply life but a reshaping of possibility. By raising oxygen, they set the stage for insects to become titans, for amphibians to push into new territories, for flames to become a constant shadow across the land. And yet, this very abundance carried seeds of instability. For when the world grows too rich, it also grows fragile. Tonight, as we breathe 21% oxygen, a balance struck over eons, we carry within us the legacy of these ancient forests. Their bodies lie buried deep below, waiting as coal and shale. Their breath still lingers in the air, diluted but not forgotten. And as we prepare to move deeper into this story, we must remember that life and atmosphere are inseparable. The forests forged the sky, and the sky in turn forged life. Step back into the shadows of the swamp, where the still water reflects the trunks of trees like dark mirrors. The air is thick with the scent of damp bark, sweet decay, and something more subtle, the quiet accumulation of centuries. All around, the forest drops its offerings, leaves drifting down like fragments of parchment, branches torn loose in storms, trunks collapsing with slow inevitability into the muck. Yet the story here is not simply of growth and fall, it is of what happens next, or rather what does not. In our modern world, the death of a tree is only the beginning of another life. Fungi swarm over the fallen wood, white threads of mycelium spreading like veins through bark and heartwood. Microbes unlock sugars and proteins. Insects bore tunnels that become doorways for further decomposition. Within a handful of years, the tree is gone, dissolved into soil and air. But in the Carboniferous, this cycle had not yet evolved its full complexity. Lignin, the stiff polymer that gave trees their immense strength, stood as an unbreakable barrier. Fungi of the age had not yet cracked its code. Microbes gnawed at softer tissues, but the lignin remained, armored against decay. So the forests piled up their dead, layer upon layer, century upon century. Whole groves toppled and vanished, not into soil but into the wet earth, sealed under waterlogged sediments. Instead of rotting, they transformed. Peat thickened, compressing into beds that, under heat and time, would harden into coal. Each fallen tree became part of a carbon vault, locked away from the atmosphere. For every atom of carbon buried, a molecule of oxygen lingered in the sky. The imbalance grew, tipping Earth toward hyperoxia. Here lies one of the great oddities of history, that life created a substance it could not yet destroy. Lignin was both a triumph and a trap. It allowed trees to rise higher than ever before, to weave forests that reached skyward like green cathedrals. Yet its very strength defied the decomposers. The ecosystem produced mountains of carbon it could not recycle. The planet's chemistry was rewritten by a single innovation for which no countermeasure yet existed. It would not last forever. At some point, perhaps late in the Carboniferous, perhaps into the Permian, fungi evolved enzymes capable of breaking lignin apart. These white rot fungi changed everything. Where once a fallen trunk would lie untouched for millennia, it could now vanish in years. The endless burial of carbon slowed, oxygen began to decline, and the hyperoxic world retreated into memory. But in the window before this innovation, Earth became a planet of excess. The air swollen, the forests immortal in their decay. Scientists continue to debate the timing of this shift. Fossilized fungal spores suggest white rot appeared just as the Carboniferous gave way to drier, more fragmented landscapes. Some argue that this evolutionary leap was as transformative as the rise of photosynthesis itself. After all, photosynthesis had filled the atmosphere with oxygen, and fungi now ensured that it would not rise unchecked again. The balance of atmosphere found a new equilibrium, one closer to what we breathe today. But for tens of millions of years, the stalemate remained. Trees falling, carbon burying, oxygen rising, and in this stalemate, giants thrived. Insects could grow larger, amphibians could explore new terrains, and wildfires could rage with unnatural fury. All of it was enabled by the fact that fungi had not yet solved a puzzle. We can imagine a world where they never did, A parallel Earth with oxygen even higher, life distorted into stranger shapes, perhaps unsustainable, perhaps uninhabitable. Odd tales emerge from this era. In certain fossil beds, we find evidence of immense fungi-like organisms that reach the height of small trees, known as prototaxites. These organisms may have dominated landscapes even before the reign of the great forests. Their identity remains debated. Were they giant fungi, lichens, or something else entirely? If they were fungi, they may have stood as ancient monarchs, only to be eclipsed by the rise of trees whose dead bodies they could not yet consume. In this sense, the Carboniferous is a stage play where fungi first lost their crown, only to reclaim it with the evolution of lignin-degrading enzymes. And still, the uncertainty lingers. Were fungi alone responsible for the eventual fall of hyperoxia? Or did shifting continents, changing climates, and the collapse of swamp forests deliver the decisive blow? In science, answers come not as certainties but as layers, hypotheses laid upon fossils, fossils upon sediments, sediments upon time. The truth may be more intricate than any single explanation. To stand in these forests is to feel time itself in suspension. Fallen trunks stretch into the water like bridges, preserved in the embrace of their own chemistry. Amphibians slip across the mud, dragonflies hover overhead, and still the trees fall, one after another, feeding an endless vault below. The planet itself seems to inhale, drawing carbon deep into its lungs, and exhale oxygen into the sky. It is as if Earth has chosen to store away its energy for some future age, while gifting the present with an atmosphere of fire. And we, breathing now in the quiet of our modern rooms, live with the echoes of that vault. The coal seams that fueled human industry, that lit furnaces, and drove engines, are the compressed memory of forests that never fully decayed. Every spark struck in a steam engine, every glow of a lamp in the Industrial Revolution, was oxygen's twin legacy, the buried carbon of the Carboniferous brought back into the light, its balance undone. We inherited the power of those forests, but also their paradox. Here lies the lesson that ecosystems are never static, that innovation in one corner of life can shift the balance of an entire planet. The trees built lignin, and by building it, they remade the sky. The fungi learned to undo lignin, and by undoing it, they prevented Earth from tipping into an atmosphere too volatile for complex life. Between creation and destruction, balance is found, but always temporarily. The pendulum swings, and life learns to adapt. As we leave these buried forests, let us carry the image of trunks sinking into the mud, preserved against time, waiting to be transformed. For out of this quiet burial, life's next act was already being prepared. With the sky rich in oxygen, creatures would seize opportunities never before possible. Insects would stretch their wings beyond measure, arthropods would crawl as giants across the land, and amphibians would test the boundaries of air and water. The forests had forged the sky. Now the sky would forge its monsters. Step into the dim, trembling light of the Carboniferous forest. And listen, the silence is never whole. Wings hum through the humid air, carrying a resonance so deep it rattles in your chest. Something vast drifts between the trunks, its shadow sweeping across the swamp floor. You look upward, and there it is, a dragonfly, but not the fragile creature you know. Its wings stretch wider than the span of a hawk, their veins glittering like stained glass in the sun. Its body is as long as your forearm, its compound eyes the size of coins, reflecting the green glow of the canopy. This is Maganura, the giant dragonfly, ruler of the air. Here, insects are no longer fragile ornaments of nature, they are giants. The atmosphere itself has rewritten their limits, swelling their bodies to forms impossible in the world you know. Insects breathe not with lungs, but with a system of spiracles and tracheae, pores in their exoskeletons that draw oxygen directly into a branching network of tubes. In modern air, diffusion limits their size. Oxygen cannot travel far enough to sustain large bodies, but in the hyperoxic air of the Carboniferous, 35% oxygen flows easily through these channels. Wings can beat, muscles can burn, and bodies can stretch into monstrous scale. The very air is their ally. Across the swamp floor crawls an even more startling form. Segments ripple like armored plates, each as broad as a human hand. Dozens of legs carry its body forward, scraping across the damp soil. It is Arthropleura, a millipede-like titan stretching over 8 feet in length. Imagine kneeling beside it. Its back rises nearly to your waist, its body longer than a bed. It feeds on decaying vegetation, yet its sheer bulk is unsettling, as if the forest itself has sent a fragment of its strength crawling across the earth. Fossil trackways show these monsters moving in groups, their many feet churning the mud into patterned trails. To encounter one would be to feel the scale of life itself exaggerated, swollen to a dreamlike magnitude. Not all of these giants are benign. In shallow burrows, hidden beneath the roots, scorpions lurk, but not the palm-sized creatures you know. These are Pulmonoscorpius, scorpions nearly 30 inches long. Their claws clack against stone, their tails arch high above their armored bodies. With lungs adapted to both land and water, they stalk the margins of swamps, hunting amphibians and insects that stray too close. Imagine the sound of their steps in the night, or the glitter of their shells by firelight. To live in the Carboniferous was to know that smallness was no defense. The invertebrates of this world towered over their descendants. Above you, other wings drift in patterns strange and unfamiliar. Paleodictoptera, an extinct order of insects, glide through the air with 6 wings, 2 pairs like those of dragonflies, plus an extra set on their thorax. Their wingspans reach nearly 2 feet, their bodies decorated with mouth parts that could pierce plant tissues. Fossils reveal delicate venation, as intricate as frost on glass, telling us these creatures were among the earliest masters of the skies. To see them flutter between tree crowns would be to witness a world where evolution experimented on a scale now unimaginable. And yet, despite their abundance, these titans raise questions that science cannot fully answer. Could Maganura truly fly with such mass, even in oxygen-rich air? Aerodynamic models suggest it may have relied on dense forests and favorable air currents, soaring rather than flapping like modern dragonflies. Perhaps they launched from trees like gliders, drifting silently over swamps before descending on prey. Or perhaps their bodies were lighter than we imagine, their internal structures hollowed to reduce weight. Fossils preserve shapes, not muscle strength or tissue density, and so the debate lingers. What we do know is that gigantism flourished in this atmospheric window and vanished when oxygen declined. Modern insects cannot grow so vast because their tracheal systems cannot carry enough oxygen to fuel them. But in laboratories today, when insects are raised in hyperoxic chambers, they indeed grow larger. Cockroaches, crickets and dragonflies expand beyond normal limits, echoing the rules of the Carboniferous. It is a reminder that the giants of that time were not anomalies, but products of physics and chemistry, life obeying the atmosphere's script. Odd details make the picture stranger still. Fossilized Arthropleura trackways are sometimes found crossing open ground in places where forests once thinned. Were they migrating, seeking food, or were they simply moving in numbers too large to be sustained by a single swamp? Some paleontologists imagine them stripping vegetation like herds of grazers, reshaping the undergrowth by sheer volume. In this, they would have played a role similar to elephants today, engineers of the landscape, forcing change wherever they moved. Even the predators of this age were shaped by oxygen's abundance. Amphibians prowled the swamps with lungs tuned to the thick air, their bodies swelling into crocodile-like forms. Some hunted fish in shallow pools, others stalked insects on land. Yet invertebrates remained dominant, their size giving them power equal to or greater than vertebrates. It was perhaps the only time in Earth's history when insects ruled without question, their dominance inscribed not in numbers alone, but in sheer physical scale. And yet, this dominion was fragile. The very air that sustained them was unstable, a gift that could be withdrawn. When oxygen later fell, the titans dwindled. By the Permian, Arthropleura was gone, Maganura had vanished, and scorpions shrank to the sizes we know. Their greatness was temporary, dependent on a narrow chemical window that closed forever. What we see in their fossils is a reminder that scale itself is contingent, dictated not only by genes or evolution but by the air each creature breathes. The debates continue. Some researchers argue that gigantism was not simply oxygen-driven, but also shaped by evolutionary pressures. Larger insects may have been harder to prey upon, or able to fly higher in dense canopies. Others suggest that predator-prey arms races forced body sizes upward on both sides, with amphibians growing larger to hunt insects, and insects responding in kind. The truth may be layered, with oxygen as the foundation upon which other forces played their parts. To imagine living in this world is to step into a dream of excess. The buzz of a dragonfly is not a background hum, but a roar. A scorpion in the underbrush is not a curiosity but a threat. A millipede crossing the path is not something you might step on, but something you might step aside for, quickly. The forests hum with life amplified, inflated, magnified. Even the shadows carry weight. And as you breathe in this world, you realize that it is the breath itself, the oxygen thick in the air, that has written these creatures into being. They are children of atmosphere, sculpted by the chemistry of their time. Without it, they would be impossible. With it, they are inevitable. Insects became titans not by will, not by design, but by air. And when the air changed, so too did their fate. For now, though, in this moment of ancient history, they are rulers, their dominance painted across the sky in vast wings, across the soil in crawling giants, across the night in gleaming claws. It is their empire, and we are only witnesses. Close your eyes and listen to the Carboniferous night. The swamp hums with the chorus of insects, wings thrumming in endless counterpoint, while amphibians croak from pools hidden in the dark. The air is heavy, saturated with moisture and the sharp tang of oxygen. But beneath the sounds of life is a silence more ominous, the silence of tinder waiting for a spark. A storm brews above, lightning splits the sky, white threads across black clouds striking into the heart of the forest. In our modern world, wet wood resists ignition, but not here. Here the atmosphere is 35% oxygen, and dampness is no shield. A single bolt is enough. The strike blossoms into flame, and in moments the fire leaps from one trunk to another, racing across the swamp as if the forest has been soaked in oil. Trees explode in cascades of embers, spores ignite mid-air, and smoke rolls upward in towers so vast they blot out the stars. You are witnessing the cost of abundance, a world perpetually on the edge of fire. Hyperoxic air is both gift and curse. It fuels the breath of giants, but it also magnifies destruction. Fire, which we think of as a rarity, becomes inevitable. In controlled laboratory conditions today, researchers show that even damp vegetation can ignite and burn intensely when oxygen levels exceed 25%. At 35%, nearly everything becomes flammable. Sparks from volcanic eruptions, dry lightning, even friction between branches in a storm could unleash devastation. The Carboniferous Earth was a fire-soaked Earth, and life adapted to this reality. What did these infernos look like? Imagine flames leaping through reeds and lycopsid trunks, consuming ferns in bursts of orange and gold. Imagine dragonflies fleeing upward into air, choked with ash, their wings glimmering against the firelight. Amphibians dive into pools for safety, their lungs straining in the smoke. Even Arthropleura, armored titan of the forest floor, must turn aside, its segmented body glowing in the light of destruction. Fire was not an intruder here, it was a force as natural as rain or wind, sculpting landscapes, pruning forests, and setting limits on how high oxygen could climb. Some scientists suggest that these wildfires acted as a planetary regulator. Without them, oxygen might have risen beyond 35%, perhaps to 40%, a concentration so high that life as we know it might not have endured. Flames in this view were Earth's balancing act, burning away excess vegetation and feeding carbon back into the sky as carbon dioxide. But others caution that this explanation is too simple. Perhaps climate shifts, rainfall, and the slow movements of continents played equal roles. The debate lingers, like smoke drifting long after the fire is gone. Oddities appear in the fossil record to remind us of these blazes. Layers of ancient rock preserve charcoal, carbonized remnants of plants that burned millions of years ago. These thin black seams, scattered across continents, are silent witnesses to infernos that raged across the swamp world. Some seams stretch for miles, evidence that fires were not small or rare, but sweeping, continent-scale events. To hold such a piece of fossil charcoal today is to hold a fragment of Carboniferous fire, frozen in stone. And yet, Fire was not only destructive, it was also a creator. By clearing dense forests, it opened space for new growth. It returned nutrients to the soil, recycling what the absence of fungi could not. It forced resilience into the ecosystem. Lycopsids and ferns, with their rapid growth and spore-based reproduction, were well adapted to recolonize burned ground. Each inferno reset the cycle, ensuring not only destruction, but renewal. Fire's paradox is that it consumes but also sustains, shaping landscapes in ways that no other force can. Still, the peril was real. Hyperoxia meant that even animals themselves became vulnerable to fire in ways unimaginable today. Insects with large tracheal systems risked suffocation in smoke or immolation in flame. Amphibians, though able to retreat to water, found their habitats destroyed again and again. Even the giants could not escape entirely. Perhaps this is why many Carboniferous species bore adaptations for mobility: wings to escape upward, limbs to burrow or crawl away, bodies light enough to flee yet strong enough to endure. Speculation lingers about whether firestorms influenced evolution itself. Did the constant presence of fire favor species that could disperse rapidly, reproduce quickly, or endure extreme heat? Did the rhythm of destruction and regrowth shape the diversity of insects, pushing them toward flight as a means of survival? Some paleontologists argue that the rise of wings in insects coincided not only with oxygen abundance, but also with the necessity of escaping the flames. If so, fire may have been both destroyer and teacher, forcing life into new strategies. The unknowns remain vast. How frequent were these fires? How intense? Did they span continents or remain local to certain swamp belts? We know only what charcoal layers and geochemical signals whisper to us: that fire was constant, persistent, woven into the Carboniferous like veins in a leaf. And in this uncertainty lies wonder, for the past is never fully lit, only glimpsed in flashes, like firelight glimpsed through smoke. To walk through the aftermath of such a blaze is to see the fragility and resilience of life entwined. The air would hang heavy with ash, the ground coated in soot. Charred trunks would stand like blackened monuments, and yet, within weeks or months, green shoots would push upward again. Spore clouds would drift like ghostly mist across the burned ground, heralding the return of ferns and horsetails. Even in destruction, life prepared its next act. We might imagine the fire-soaked earth as hostile, but it was also fertile. The balance of oxygen, carbon and fire kept the ecosystem dynamic. Too much oxygen, and fire surged. Too much fire, and vegetation waned. From this tension arose a cycle that endured for millions of years. It is a reminder that stability is often born not of calm, but of conflict held in balance. And in the glow of those ancient flames, we can sense the fragility of our own world. Today we live in an atmosphere where fire is possible, but not inevitable. We carry oxygen's gift in our lungs, but we also carry its peril in every spark. The Carboniferous reminds us that air itself can be too much, that abundance can tip into danger, and that fire will always follow oxygen like a shadow. The earth then was alive with giants, but it was also alive with flame. Every forest was tinder, every storm a threat. The fire-soaked earth was not a place of quiet safety, but of drama written in smoke and light. And yet, through it all, life persisted, adapted, even thrived. As the smoke clears, we turn to a deeper mystery, the question of how gigantism itself emerged, and why insects swelled into monsters that defy our sense of scale. Fire explained the danger, but oxygen explained the possibility. In the next breath of our journey, we step into the enigma of size, into the debate that still burns as fiercely in science as fire once burned in the forests. Step again beneath the shadow of the Carboniferous canopy, and imagine the buzzing of wings above your head. They do not sound like the gentle flutter of a butterfly or the thin drone of a modern mosquito. These are deeper, heavier tones, a thrumming like the vibration of a taut string struck by unseen hands. A dragonfly the size of a raven glides through shafts of green light, its veined wings shimmering. A scorpion, longer than your arm, scuttles across a root, its claws clacking like iron. Even millipede-like Arthropleura moves with the slow certainty of a creature larger than any invertebrate today. This is the enigma of gigantism, a puzzle that has fascinated scientists for centuries. Why did insects and arthropods grow so impossibly large in this time, and why do we no longer see their like? The simplest answer lies in the air itself. Insects breathe without lungs, their oxygen carried passively through spiracles and tracheae that weave like pipes through their bodies. In our modern atmosphere, diffusion sets limits. Oxygen can only travel so far before it is consumed. This is why insects today remain small, their systems constrained by physics. But in a world where oxygen made up 35% of every breath, those limits dissolved. Oxygen reached tissues more easily, fueling muscles and organs that could grow to extraordinary scales. The tracheal system, once a limitation, became an open invitation to expansion. Yet simplicity never tells the whole story. Some paleontologists argue that the hyperoxic atmosphere is only part of the explanation. Could other forces have pushed body size upward? Perhaps the forests themselves, dense and dim, selected for wings capable of gliding across vast distances in search of food. Perhaps predators like amphibians grew larger, forcing their prey, the insects, to evolve greater size in defense. Gigantism might not have been only a gift of oxygen, but also an evolutionary arms race, each creature responding to the challenge of others. Odd debates even reach into the skies. Could Meganeura, the giant dragonfly, truly fly with such bulk? Some aerodynamic models suggest its wings would have struggled to lift such weight, even in dense, oxygen-rich air. Maybe these creatures were not agile hunters like modern dragonflies, but ambush predators, launching short flights from tree trunks and gliding with precision through narrow clearings. Fossils cannot reveal the strength of their muscles or the exact density of their bodies, so speculation persists. They remain suspended between science and imagination, their very flight an unresolved mystery. Laboratories today attempt to pierce this veil. In controlled hyperoxic chambers, modern insects are raised in atmospheres richer than ours, and indeed they grow larger. Crickets swell beyond their normal size, cockroaches expand, even dragonfly larvae become outsized. Yet there are limits. Too much oxygen damages tissue, shortens lifespans, and overwhelms biological systems. The giants of the Carboniferous must have balanced this abundance carefully, thriving in its gift but flirting always with its dangers. Consider the strangeness of this paradox. Oxygen was both their enabler and their threat. In small doses it powers life. In excess it corrodes, oxidizing DNA, weakening cells, burning too brightly. These insects lived in a world where every breath carried abundance and peril alike. Perhaps they grew large because they could, not because it was always safe. Their size might have been as much an evolutionary gamble as a triumph. The fossil record adds its own puzzles. In certain deposits we find arthropleura trackways stretching across mudflats, impressions of dozens of legs moving in synchronized rhythm. Some tracks show paths wide enough to suggest creatures broader than any invertebrate today. Were these solitary wanderers, or did they move in groups, their sheer numbers shaping the undergrowth like herds of grazing mammals? We cannot know. The tracks end abruptly, as if the earth swallowed the creatures whole, leaving only whispers of their presence. And then there are the delicate fossils of Paleodictopota, insects with 6 wings instead of 4. Their strange anatomy raises further questions. Why 6 wings? Were they remnants of an evolutionary experiment, abandoned as inefficient? Or did extra wings grant them a unique style of flight now lost to history? Gigantism was not only about size but about novelty. Nature experimenting with forms, as if the atmosphere itself gave it permission to play. The unknowns stretch further. If oxygen alone explains gigantism, why did not all insects become enormous? Many remained small, even in hyperoxic air. Perhaps the key lay in ecological niches, in competition, in the delicate balance between predator and prey. Perhaps size was both opportunity and liability, granting dominance in some arenas, but exposing vulnerability in others. Large insects could travel farther, hunt bigger prey, and intimidate rivals, but they also needed more resources, more space, and perhaps suffered more in fires and storms. Some scientists imagine even stranger possibilities, that gigantism was partly a byproduct of atmospheric density itself. Air thicker with oxygen might have changed buoyancy and lift, making larger bodies more feasible aloft. If so, gigantism was not only about diffusion through tracheae, but about physics of flight and motion altered by the very texture of the sky. To walk through a Carboniferous forest, then, was not only to encounter bigger creatures, but to move through air that carried them differently, a medium thicker, heavier, more alive. In the end, gigantism remains a mystery without a single answer. Oxygen was a key, but perhaps not the only one. Evolution, climate, fire, predation, all may have turned in concert, each cog meshing with the others, until the result was a world of titans. And when oxygen fell, when the forests collapsed, when fungi learned to devour lignin, the system shifted. The cogs disengaged, the titans vanished, and gigantism became a memory locked in stone. Imagine standing there watching a dragonfly larger than a crow settle on a branch, its wings rattling like paper in the wind. Imagine an arthropleura crossing your path, its segmented body longer than your height. Imagine a scorpion in the underbrush, claws raised, tail gleaming in the dim light. To see them is to know that scale itself is not fixed. It is negotiable, mutable, dependent on the air, the fire, the forests. Life is not bound to the sizes we know, but to the conditions it breathes. And tonight, as you breathe the steady 21% oxygen of our own age, let yourself feel the wonder of that lost possibility. The mystery of gigantism is not solved, not fully. It lingers in fossils, in models, in debates that flicker like firelight. It tells us that Earth is not a place of constants but of experiments, that even the air itself can redraw the boundaries of what life may become. The Carboniferous world was a paradise of swamps and shadows, a cathedral of trees that stretched across the supercontinent. For millions of years, lycopsids, ferns, and horsetails thrived in endless humid forests. Insects ruled the skies in colossal forms, amphibians spread into every pool and marsh, and oxygen remained high, the very breath of the world swollen to 35%. Yet paradise is never eternal. Slowly, imperceptibly, cracks formed in this green empire. What had seemed unshakable began to unravel, until the great forests collapsed, and with them, the titans of the age. The story begins with the continents themselves. Gondwana in the south and Euramerica in the north drifted together, their collision pushing mountains skyward and reshaping climates. The humid belts that had fed the great swamp forests narrowed, rain that had once fallen in abundance grew fickle, monsoons faltered, seasons sharpened, and vast areas of forest began to dry. What had been stable swamp became patchwork, lush pockets. Here, arid stretches there. The interconnected empire of forests was no longer continuous. Fragmentation spread like cracks in ice. Imagine walking through one of these forests at the moment of change. Pools that once mirrored the canopy shrink into muddy depressions. Amphibians crowd around the remaining water, their calls desperate and dense. Ferns wither, their spores drifting without promise. The trunks of lycopsids topple in storms, and for the first time, fungi begin to colonize them, their white threads unraveling lignin that once defied decay. Fire sweeps across dry regions with renewed ferocity, no longer checked by constant dampness. The very rhythm of the Carboniferous falters. This event is known in paleontology as the Carboniferous rainforest collapse. It was not a single cataclysm, but a drawn-out transformation, a restructuring of ecosystems across millions of years. Oxygen levels fell as forests shrank. Coal seams, once laid down in endless abundance, became less frequent. Giants such as Arthropleura dwindled, their habitats splintered, their food less reliable. Amphibians, which had depended on moist swamps to lay their eggs, found themselves trapped in shrinking refuges. Many species vanished. Odd fragments of evidence tell this tale. In certain fossil beds we find sudden shifts, one layer rich in diverse amphibian fossils, the next barren of them. Leaf fossils, once broad and varied, become monotonous, dominated by species adapted to drier climates. Coal seams thin out, their vast expanses reduced to pockets. Even oxygen's geochemical signatures show decline, marking the breath of the world as it contracted. The collapse is written in stone like a slow, tragic poem. But as always in Earth's history, endings are also beginnings. The The decline of swamp forests opened opportunities for new kinds of life. Amphibians, bound to water, suffered, but reptiles with their amniotic eggs, self-contained with protective shells, spread into the drier landscapes. They no longer needed swamps for reproduction. This single adaptation gave them freedom, and in the wake of collapse they began their rise. The fall of one empire fed the ascent of another. Debate persists about the precise causes of the collapse. Was it primarily climate, driven by continental drift and mountain building, that shifted rainfall? Was it the evolutionary rise of fungi capable of breaking down lignin, ending the unchecked burial of carbon? Or was it fire, intensified in drying landscapes, consuming forests faster than they could recover? The truth, as always, may be woven of all three: climate, biology, and chemistry, dancing together in destructive harmony. Consider the irony: the very abundance of the Carboniferous may have sown its downfall. Forests that locked away carbon raised oxygen to unsustainable highs. Oxygen-fueled fires that cleared the same forests. Drying climates compounded the damage, and fungi at last discovered the key to decomposition. Together, these forces dismantled the balance that had allowed insects to grow enormous and swamps to sprawl across continents. The hyperoxic world unraveled, and life adapted to its new constraints. What of the giants themselves? Meganeura vanished, its wings folded forever in stone. Arthropleura, the 8-foot millipede, left only trackways, its massive body erased by time. Amphibians that had grown to the size of crocodiles diminished, their niches overtaken by reptiles. Even the oxygen-rich breath that had inflated this world diminished, shrinking to levels closer to our own. Life had stretched into grandeur, and now it contracted. Odd hints remain, small windows into survival. Some arthropods, though smaller, endured into later ages. Scorpions shrank but did not vanish. Dragonflies, though never again the size of hawks, persisted as slender shadows of their Carboniferous kin. Amphibians survived too, reduced in range and size, holding on in pockets of suitable habitat. Even in collapse, echoes remained, threads carrying forward into the future. Imagine the forests as they withered. The green cathedrals, once endless, broke apart into groves surrounded by scrub and dry plains. The once constant chorus of insects thinned. Fires scarred the land, leaving blackened trunks that stood like gravestones. Pools shrank, their amphibians crowded and gasping. The sky itself changed, with less oxygen. The air felt lighter, thinner, less intoxicating. To breathe it was no longer to drink fuel, but to sip something more modest. The drama of gigantism gave way to moderation. And yet within this collapse lay resilience. Evolution thrives on disruption as much as stability. The loss of the swamp forests forced innovation. Reptiles began their ascent, mammals were seeded in possibility, and ecosystems restructured around new realities. What seemed an end was only a turning of the page. For us looking back, the Carboniferous rainforest collapse carries a quiet warning. Ecosystems, no matter how immense, are not invulnerable. They depend on balance, of climate, chemistry, and life itself. When balance tips, collapse can follow, reshaping everything. Our own age, with its rising carbon and changing climates, can hear echoes of this ancient fall. The past whispers not only what was, but what could be again. The rainforests of the Carboniferous forged oxygen's empire, and their collapse ended it. They built giants, then unbuilt them. Their story is a reminder that nothing in nature is permanent, that abundance can curdle into fragility, that even air itself is subject to change. And as we step away from this fallen world, we turn toward those who inherited its ruins, the survivors, the innovators, the creatures who carried life forward into new ages. For when forests fall, new rulers always rise. The Carboniferous forests had fallen. Their trunks, once as high as towers, lay rotting in the mud or buried in seams of peat. Oxygen levels, once swollen with abundance, declined as carbon was no longer locked away in the same great volumes. The reign of giant insects and amphibians faltered. Yet Earth did not grow silent. Out of the shadows of collapse emerged survivors, not merely remnants but pioneers, beings forged for a drier, harsher world. Picture the swamps shrinking into scattered pockets, green oases surrounded by spreading scrubland. Amphibians, bound to water by their fragile eggs and permeable skin, crowded into what refuges remained. Their numbers dwindled, their dominance ended, but another lineage, smaller and more inconspicuous at first, took advantage of the changing world. These were the reptiles, carrying with them a secret weapon that would alter the course of life forever: the amniotic egg. The amniotic egg was not simply a vessel, it was a revolution. Enclosed in a protective shell, cushioned by fluid, nourished by yolk, it freed reproduction from water. No longer did creatures need to return to ponds or swamps to lay their eggs. Embryos developed in their own self-contained worlds, guarded against desiccation. With this adaptation, reptiles could stride confidently into drier landscapes, their future no longer chained to the margins of shrinking forests. Where amphibians were confined, reptiles expanded. Imagine a small lizard-like reptile scuttling across a forest clearing, its claws gripping the drying soil. It lays its eggs not in water but in hidden burrows, safe from the heat of the sun. These eggs hatch into miniature versions of the adults, not fragile tadpoles but fully formed, ready to crawl and hunt. Each birth is a statement. Survival has shifted from water to land. It is a quiet revolution, but one whose consequences will echo through all of Earth's history. Reptiles were not the only survivors. Insects too persisted, though diminished in scale. Meganeura, the hawk-sized dragonfly, vanished, but smaller dragonflies endured, their lineage stretching into our own age. Scorpions shrank from giants into creatures small enough to hide beneath stones, yet their venom still guaranteed survival. Cockroaches, already present in the Carboniferous, weathered the collapse and multiplied, proving themselves masters of endurance. Even Arthropleura, the immense millipede, did not vanish instantly, but dwindled until finally disappearing in the Permian. Survivorship was a spectrum, and size was no guarantee of success. Oddities also flourished. Some amphibians managed to adapt, developing thicker skins or behaviors that allowed them to survive in drier conditions. Fossils of labyrinthodont amphibians, with their labyrinthine tooth patterns, suggest that a few lineages clung on, stubborn against change. Meanwhile, early synapsids, the ancestors of mammals, began to appear. They were small, sharp-toothed, and unimpressive compared to the giants that came before, but in the quiet margins they planted seeds of a lineage that would one day dominate. The scientific debate over this transition remains lively. Was it the drying climate that gave reptiles the advantage, or their evolutionary novelty? Did the collapse of forests simply remove amphibians, leaving open niches, or did reptiles actively outcompete them? The truth may lie in both, environment narrowing opportunities for some while opening doors for others. The amniotic egg was not merely convenient, it was liberation, and in the crucible of change, liberation meant survival. Consider the symbolic weight of this shift. For millions of years, amphibians had represented the frontier of vertebrate evolution, bridging water and land. Their croaks filled the Carboniferous nights, their bodies patrolled both swamp and stream, but when the rains faltered, their empire broke. Reptiles, with their eggs and scales, became architects of the future. From them would arise dinosaurs, birds and mammals. From them eventually would come us. The fossil record tells the story in fragments. Trackways preserved in ancient mud show reptiles walking boldly across open ground. Their claw marks press into sediment, where amphibians rarely ventured. Tiny bones, hardened and delicate, reveal new body plans emerging, jaws reshaped, limbs altered for running instead of swimming. The world was shifting from one dominated by swamp dwellers to one ruled by true land creatures. And yet, the transition was not abrupt. For a time, both amphibians and reptiles coexisted, their fortunes waxing and waning with each fluctuation of climate. There must have been landscapes where giant amphibians still lurked in pools, their heads breaking the water like crocodiles, while reptiles darted on the banks. In those moments, the old and new worlds overlapped, a fragile balance before the inevitable tipping. Odd speculative threads tempt the imagination. Could some of the last Arthropleura have been hunted by reptiles, their vast bodies vulnerable as forests shrank? Did early reptiles prey on the eggs of amphibians, hastening their decline? Fossils cannot confirm such stories, but the possibility lingers, reminding us that survival is never a clean transfer of power, but a messy, overlapping struggle. As oxygen declined from its peak, the very physiology of life adjusted. Insects shrank back into more modest proportions, their tracheal systems once again constrained. Amphibians, struggling with limited lungs and porous skin, weakened, but reptiles thrived, their lungs efficient, their scales protective, their eggs mobile. In the narrowing breadth of Earth, they found room to expand. To walk in this transformed world is to feel the shift in atmosphere itself. The air, thinner now, no longer carries the intoxication of abundance. Fires are fewer, less ferocious. The giants are gone, replaced by creatures smaller but more versatile. The forests, fragmented, allow sunlight to strike the soil where once it was filtered through endless canopy. It is a world sobered from its excess, reshaped into something more familiar, though still strange. This rise of new survivors tells us something profound about resilience. Collapse is never the end of life. It is a rebalancing, a reweaving of the web. Some threads are cut, others pulled taut, and new patterns emerge. The Carboniferous collapse was catastrophic for giants, but it was opportunity for reptiles, insects, and early synapsids. Evolution does not pause for mourning. It adapts, selects, reshapes, and moves on. And as we breathe the legacy of these changes tonight, we may reflect on our own place. Just as reptiles inherited a world transformed, we too live in a time of shifting climate, collapsing forests, and uncertain futures. The lesson of the Carboniferous is not despair but humility, that life will endure, but never unchanged. Survivors always rise, and the shape of the future is written in their adaptations. In the next step of our journey, we will turn to the fossils themselves, the echoes left in stone and amber, that reveal how we piece together the atmosphere of long-lost worlds. The survivors left us not only their descendants but their traces, and through them, we reconstruct the breath of a vanished Earth. The world we walk through now is silent, the swamps long gone, the forests collapsed into seams of coal, and the titans turned to dust. Yet their story is not lost. It lingers in stone, in amber, in subtle signatures etched into the chemistry of leaves and the pores of fossils. To know what 35% oxygen did to life on Earth, we must learn to listen to these echoes, to let fragments of ancient matter speak in whispers across deep time. Imagine holding a dragonfly wing fossil, its veins preserved with astonishing delicacy. Each line of venation once carried air, once flexed with living flight. Now it is pressed into shale, an imprint that tells us of a creature that should not have been possible in our present atmosphere. Fossils like this are not simply relics. They are measurements, evidence that confirms the hyperoxic breath of the Carboniferous. For without that swollen atmosphere, wingspans of nearly 30 inches could never have carried a dragonfly aloft. The evidence of fire is recorded too. Across continents, thin black seams of fossil charcoal are threaded through Carboniferous strata. Each seam is the aftermath of an ancient blaze, plants burned to cinders and preserved as carbonized fragments. When geologists examine these layers, they see not only ash but chemistry, ratios of isotopes that reveal how intense the fires burned and how much oxygen was feeding them. The fossil record in this sense is a diary of flame. Every seam a sentence, every deposit a reminder that the world once teetered on the edge of combustion. Even stranger evidence lies in amber. Tiny bubbles trapped within fossilized resin sometimes contain remnants of ancient air. Scientists have pierced these golden time capsules with fine needles, measuring their gases. In some, the oxygen content is higher than today's 21%, a direct inhalation of Carboniferous breath. To hold such amber in your hand is to cradle a fragment of atmosphere itself, sealed for hundreds of millions of years. Odd as it seems, the air of giants still lingers, imprisoned in drops of hardened resin. Leaves, too, are witnesses. On their surfaces, tiny pores called stomata regulate the exchange of gases. The density of these stomata varies with atmospheric composition. When oxygen is abundant and carbon dioxide low, plants require fewer pores to breathe. Paleobotanists count the stomata on fossil leaves, comparing them with modern analogues. and from these counts reconstruct the air of ancient times. A fern frond pressed into stone becomes more than a shape. It becomes a barometer of the Carboniferous sky. The tools of modern science extend this detective work further. Synchrotron imaging, beams of high-energy light, allow researchers to peer into fossils without destroying them, revealing the structure of Triaean insects, the delicate tissues of amphibians, even the growth rings of trees. Isotope analysis traces the chemistry of ancient soils and coals, showing how oxygen and carbon cycled through ecosystems. Computer models weave these clues together, simulating climates and atmospheres to test whether they could sustain the giants we see in stone. Every fossil, every bubble, every pore becomes a pixel in a grand mosaic of reconstruction. And yet, mysteries remain. Some amber samples yield oxygen levels consistent with 35%. Others suggest fluctuations, dips and rises across millions of years. Were these changes global or local? Were some forests more oxygen-rich than others, depending on climate and geography? The answers are uncertain. The fossil record speaks, but not always clearly. It is a language half heard, half erased. Odd debates flare even here. Some researchers question whether amber bubbles truly preserve pristine air, or whether gases diffuse or alter during fossilization. Others argue about how faithfully stomatal density reflects oxygen rather than carbon dioxide. Science advances not on certainties but on cross-checks, building trust where multiple lines of evidence converge. In this case, fossils, charcoal, amber leaves, and models all point toward the same truth. Oxygen once soared higher than it ever has since. To imagine the work of these scientists is to picture laboratories filled with the hum of machines, amber glinting under microscopes, thin slices of coal examined under lenses. It is to see paleontologists crouched in quarries, brushing shale from a fossil wing, knowing that this fragile imprint is a testimony to an atmosphere lost. The fossils do not only reveal bodies, they reveal breath, fire, and time, and these echoes reach forward to us. The coal seams that once buried forests are now mined and burned, releasing carbon that had been locked away since the Carboniferous. Each lump of coal is both fuel and fossil, a piece of the ancient world rekindled. When it burns, it exhales the atmosphere of 300 million years ago back into the sky. In this way, the fossil record is not only studied, but lived. Our cities, our machines, our power, all are, in a sense, built on the breath of the Carboniferous. The unknowns are haunting. How many fires raged across the world at once? How quickly did oxygen levels rise and fall? What other creatures, soft-bodied and unpreserved, grew large in the thick air, only to vanish without fossil trace? Fossils give us fragments, not the whole. They are echoes, never the voice itself. And yet, with fragments alone, we can glimpse the enormity of the change. The fossil wing that testifies to a giant dragonfly, the charcoal seam that whispers of firestorms, the amber bubble that still holds air, each is a shard of evidence that builds the same conclusion. Oxygen reshaped life, and life reshaped oxygen. The past is not myth. It is written in matter, waiting for us to learn its language. To walk through a fossil hall today is to drift among these echoes. A slab of shale with insect wings spread across it is a frozen flight. A coal seam sample is a collapsed forest turned to stone. A piece of amber is an inhalation of a world that burned brighter. They are not only displays but doorways, each opening onto the Carboniferous night, each whispering what 35% oxygen once did to the breath of Earth. As we leave the fossil echoes behind, we move toward experiments in the present. For if fossils tell us what was, experiments let us test what could be. In hyperoxic chambers, scientists raise insects anew, probing the rules of gigantism, searching for the limits written in air. The past and the present converge, showing us that the Carboniferous is not simply a chapter long closed, but a story we can still trace in the living. Step now from the quarries and fossil halls into the glow of a modern laboratory. Here the past is not only remembered but reenacted, piece by piece within glass chambers and humming machines. The Carboniferous air, thick with 35% oxygen, cannot be recreated across the world, but it can be summoned in miniature. And within these chambers, insects breathe again, the breath of giants. Picture a sealed container, transparent and gleaming with condensation. Inside, a colony of dragonfly larvae swims in shallow water, their gills fluttering. Pumps feed oxygen into the chamber until the concentration rises above anything found in our present world. What happens next is not fantasy, but experiment. The larvae grow faster, their bodies thicker, their wings, once unfurled, longer than those of control groups in normal air. The message is clear: oxygen alone is enough to stretch the boundaries of scale. These experiments were first attempted decades ago and have grown more sophisticated with time. At Arizona State University, scientists raised dragonflies, cockroaches, and crickets under conditions of hyperoxia. The results were striking. Insects reared in atmospheres with oxygen levels between 25 and 30% grew significantly larger than those raised at 21%. The effect was especially clear in early life stages, when growth is most rapid. Oxygen fed directly into tissues through tracheae, enlarging the insects beyond modern norms. But oxygen is no simple benefactor. Too much, and it corrodes. Cells bathed in excess oxygen produce reactive molecules that damage DNA, proteins, and membranes. Organisms reared in hyperoxic conditions sometimes grow larger, but also die sooner, their bodies overwhelmed by oxidative stress. In this, we glimpse the paradox of the Carboniferous, a world that enabled giants, but perhaps also shortened their lifespans. Were Meganeura and Arthropleura creatures of brief magnificence, their size achieved at the cost of longevity? Fossils cannot tell us, but experiments suggest the possibility. The mysteries run deeper. Some insects, even in hyperoxia, do not grow dramatically larger. Their genetics and developmental pathways limit them, regardless of available oxygen. Gigantism, then, was not universal but selective, a trait expressed in some lineages more than others. Why dragonflies, scorpions, and millipedes swelled into titans while beetles and flies did not, is a question that still unsettles researchers. Perhaps ecological niches determined which species could take advantage of abundant oxygen. Perhaps predator-prey dynamics exerted additional pressures. Hyperoxia opened the door, but not all stepped through. Odd findings add further intrigue. In some experiments, insects raised in hyperoxic chambers developed thicker exoskeletons and stronger musculature, but their nervous systems showed signs of stress. Behavior changed. Some became hyperactive, others lethargic. Could the Carboniferous forests have echoed with erratic flight, with creatures that grew immense but struggled to control their own bodies? Evolution may have compensated over millions of years, fine-tuning physiology to tolerate abundance. Yet in the controlled brevity of a laboratory, oxygen's power shows both promise and peril. Modern tools allow even more precision. Micro-CT scans of insects reared under different oxygen levels reveal structural differences. Trachea that expand, air sacs that swell, body proportions subtly altered. These details mirror what paleontologists see in fossilized tracheal impressions from ancient arthropods. The experiments validate the record, showing that the giants of the Carboniferous were no aberration, but logical consequences of physics and chemistry. Still, debates linger. Some scientists argue that oxygen alone cannot explain the scale of creatures like Arthropleura. Its massive body required not only oxygen, but abundant vegetation to eat. The collapse of rainforests by fragmenting food sources may have been as fatal as declining oxygen. Others argue that climatic cooling or predation by newly rising reptiles played equal roles. In this sense, hyperoxia was not the sole driver, but part of a complex interplay. The laboratory can isolate oxygen, but nature never does. Consider the atmosphere itself as an experimenter. In one age, it raised oxygen and watched insects expand. In another, it lowered oxygen and forced them to contract. The balance of gases was like a hand on the scale of evolution, tipping possibilities this way and that. Today, experiments in hyperoxia let us glimpse the rules of this cosmic laboratory. They show us that size is not fixed, that life can stretch or shrink depending on invisible chemistry. The unknowns are as fascinating as the certainties. How high could oxygen levels have risen without destabilizing ecosystems entirely? Could there have been brief spikes above 35%, moments when fires consumed forests in planetary scale infernos? Did insects evolve physiological adaptations to resist oxidative stress? adaptations lost when oxygen fell. Experiments today hint but cannot prove. They are rehearsals of history, not replications of its full complexity. To stand beside one of these oxygen chambers in a lab is to feel a strange intimacy with the Carboniferous. The insects within, fluttering their wings or crawling across damp soil, are living echoes of giants. They show us not only what was possible, but what might be again under different atmospheres, and they remind us that air, invisible, taken for granted, is as powerful as any predator, any climate, any cataclysm. There is an almost speculative edge to this work. If we can test how oxygen shapes life, we can also imagine other worlds. Planets with denser atmospheres, rich in oxygen, might host creatures far larger than anything on Earth today. Laboratory insects become models not just of Earth's past but of extraterrestrial futures. Hyperoxia is a lens through which we glimpse both lost ages and potential ones, and so experiments in hyperoxia are more than curiosities. They are confirmations of fossils, windows into physiology, and hints of the broader rules that govern life in any atmosphere. They show that Earth's giants were no fantasy, but expressions of chemistry, as inevitable as fire in oxygen-rich air. From fossils to laboratories, we have traced the breath of the Carboniferous. But the story reaches even further, into telescopes and star fields, into the search for life beyond our planet. For if oxygen can leave such a mark on Earth, could its fingerprints guide us in the cosmos? The next scene in our journey carries us outward, to planets where the rise and fall of gases might signal the presence of beings we have never known. Lift your gaze from the fossil beds and laboratory chambers and let it wander outward, past the blue arc of Earth, beyond the familiar glow of the moon, into the uncounted stars. The story of oxygen does not end with dragonflies or coal seams. It carries forward, becoming a guidebook for worlds we have yet to see. For what happened on Earth, the swelling of oxygen, the rise of giants, the collapse of forests, may happen elsewhere. And if it does, we might glimpse it, not in fossils but in light sifted through the atmospheres of distant planets. When astronomers aim their telescopes toward exoplanets orbiting faraway suns, they are not merely seeking dots of light, they are searching for signs of breath. Every planet is cloaked in gases, and those gases betray the chemistry of life or its absence. On Earth, oxygen is the loudest of these signals, a chemical out of balance. Without life, oxygen quickly binds to rocks and oceans, only constant replenishment. Photosynthesis keeps it high. Thus, when scientists speak of oxygen as a biosignature, they mean this: its very abundance suggests living activity. But the Carboniferous teaches us that oxygen does more than hint at life. It sculpts it. At 35%, it created giants, fueled fires, and altered the trajectory of evolution. If we were to detect such a level in the atmosphere of an exoplanet, what would it mean? Would we imagine forests as vast as continents, insects stretching their wings across alien skies, firestorms raging beneath foreign constellations? Perhaps, for the physics would be the same. Oxygen is fuel, oxygen is breath, oxygen is power, and yet speculation must be cautious. The Carboniferous reminds us that oxygen is not stable. It rises and falls with geology, climate, and biology entwined. Detecting it on another world would not guarantee giants. It might instead signal a planet in flux, forests in bloom, or perhaps even microbial mats covering oceans, each exhaling oxygen into the sky. The key is context. The other gases present, the star's light, the temperature of the world. Oxygen alone whispers, but in harmony with others, it sings. Odd possibilities tempt imagination. Could hyperoxic worlds elsewhere sustain animals far stranger than our insects? Creatures with bodies buoyed by denser atmospheres, flying with ease even at colossal sizes. Could firestorms play the same regulatory role, preventing atmospheres from tipping into uninhabitable extremes? Might there be planets where oxygen rose too far, consuming ecosystems in a perpetual blaze, leaving no survivors? The Carboniferous shows us a window, but the universe might display a gallery. Astronomers debate these questions as intently as paleontologists debate dragonflies. The James Webb Space Telescope and its successors are tuned not only to detect planets, but to pass their atmospheres, searching for traces of oxygen, methane, carbon dioxide, water vapor. Each detection is a clue, each ratio a riddle. Could we one day point to a spectrum of light and say there, in that dip, is oxygen at 30%, a whisper of forests under an alien sun? The thought is both thrilling and humbling, and here the Carboniferous offers a warning. Oxygen abundance does not guarantee stability. On Earth, it led to giants, but also to collapse. The swamp forests that raised it high eventually fell, and with them much of the life it had enabled. For alien civilizations, if any exist, the same fragility might apply. To read oxygen in their skies might be to glimpse not a thriving paradise, but a fleeting moment, a balance already tipping toward change. In this, the past becomes a lens for the future. Earth teaches us that atmospheres are dynamic, ecosystems fragile, and abundance dangerous. 35% oxygen was a wonder, but it was also a hazard. Firestorms raged, oxidative stress gnawed at cells, and the entire system depended on forests that could not endure forever. Life adapted, yes, but at great cost. When we search the stars, we must remember that oxygen is not only a signature of life, but of risk. Imagine a planet where astronomers detect hyperoxia. They speculate about colossal creatures, perhaps even intelligent life, breathing the rich air. But perhaps the reality is different. Forests about to collapse, fires sweeping continents, giants nearing extinction. The Carboniferous is a cautionary tale, not just for Earth, but for every world where oxygen tips the scales. Still we dream. To envision alien skies filled with wings broader than sailplanes. To imagine forests glowing with bioluminescent fungi. To speculate about landscapes where lightning ignites fires under unfamiliar constellations. These are not idle fantasies. They are grounded in the lessons of our own planet, extended outward. Science is not only measurement, but imagination disciplined by evidence. The Carboniferous gives us both evidence and inspiration, a story to project onto the stars, and here lies a deeper reflection. We are, ourselves, descendants of that age. Without the oxygen surge, without the collapse of amphibians, without the rise of reptiles, our lineage would not exist. We are products of imbalance, of forests that forged the sky and fungi that broke it down. The fact that we now build telescopes and search for oxygen beyond Earth is a circle completed. The breath of the Carboniferous still moves through us, carried into the cosmos as curiosity. The unknowns remain vast. How many planets carry oxygen-rich atmospheres? How many of those harbor giants? How many burned themselves sterile in flames? We cannot yet know. But each exoplanet discovered expands the canvas, and each spectral line we read sharpens the possibility. Perhaps somewhere, under another sun, creatures breathe 35% oxygen, their wings humming in alien forests. Or perhaps they are already gone, leaving behind only chemical echoes waiting for others to notice. To consider this is to feel awe stretch outward. The Carboniferous was not just an episode of Earth's history, but a lesson in planetary storytelling. Atmospheres shape life, and life reshapes atmospheres, in a dialogue that can be read across the universe. When we gaze outward, we are not only searching for them, we are searching for ourselves, mirrored in the breath of other worlds. And as our gaze returns home, we see that the breath we take tonight is fragile too. Our own forests inhale and exhale carbon. Our own atmosphere wavers under human influence. We carry coal, the stored forests of the Carboniferous, into furnaces, altering the balance anew. We are both readers of the past and writers of the future, holding oxygen in our hands. The lessons for planets beyond begin here, on Earth. They tell us to look outward with wonder, but also inward with care. For what 35% oxygen did to life on Earth may echo elsewhere, and may echo again, if we are not wise. The story circles back to us. We sit here now in the quiet of the present, lungs filling and emptying with air that feels ordinary, invisible, taken for granted. Yet each breath is an inheritance, a delicate balance struck across billions of years, shaped by forests that lived and fell long before our time. What 35% oxygen once did to life on Earth was not just to inflate dragonflies or feed flames, it was to teach, through rise and collapse, that the atmosphere is not a backdrop. It is the stage itself, the playwright, and sometimes the executioner. Tonight's air holds 21% oxygen, Not too little for endurance, not too much for fire. This balance feels inevitable, as though it were always meant to be, but it is not. It is the outcome of cycles stretching back to the Carboniferous, when swamp forests locked carbon away and oxygen soared, when fungi evolved to unlock lignin and oxygen fell, when ecosystems collapsed and rebuilt themselves again. We are breathing not only molecules of oxygen, but the memory of those transformations. Every lungful is a page from Earth's ancient diary. Imagine holding in your hand a lump of coal, dark and dense. It is heavy with time, the compressed bodies of lycopsids and ferns that once towered in swamp light strike a spark against it, and it glows, the breath of the Carboniferous exhaled again after 300 million years. Our industrial world has burned forests long dead, unsealing carbon and altering balance once more. The coal seam, the engine, the chimney, these are not separate from the story of Meganeura or Arthropleura, they are its continuation. In this sense, we are living in another experiment, as profound as the one that birthed the giants. Just as forests raised oxygen, we raise carbon dioxide. Just as fungi altered balance, we alter it with fire and industry. And the question, whispered through time, is whether our balance will hold. Will our atmosphere remain steady enough for us to endure, or will it tip, as it has before, into transformations that reorder life? The scientific debates of the Carboniferous echo in our present uncertainties. Then researchers ask, did fungi end the age of giants, or did climate shift, or fire grow too fierce? Now we ask, how fast will ice melt? How far will seas rise? How much warming can our ecosystems absorb? Both then and now, the unknowns are not weaknesses, but reminders of complexity. Atmosphere is not a single lever, but a tapestry of interactions. When one thread is pulled, the whole pattern shifts. Odd reflections emerge when we compare ourselves to that ancient world. We think of dragonflies the size of hawks as alien, yet the true alien would be us. Fragile mammals trying to survive in air thick with fire. We would choke, our lungs overstimulated, our bodies burning with oxidative stress. And yet insects thrived. Life adapts not to ideals, but to circumstances, however strange. If oxygen climbed again, would life once more experiment with scale? Would creatures rise taller, fly farther, burn brighter? Perhaps. Evolution is not nostalgic. It takes what it is given and reshapes itself anew. And so the breath we inhale tonight is not just ours. It belongs to Earth, shared across eons, passed from fern to dragonfly, from reptile to bird, from coal to flame. It is the continuity that ties together swamp forests, firestorms, and human voices speaking into the night. The Carboniferous is gone, yet its breath lingers, diluted but present, every molecule a traveler from a time when the air was too rich for us. Close your eyes, feel your chest rise and fall. The rhythm is ancient. The oxygen that fills you may once have brushed the wings of a giant insect, or fed the fire that consumed a lycopsid grove, or rested for millions of years sealed in amber. Breath is time, moving invisibly through you. To notice it is to feel the connection between then and now, between 35% and 21%, between giants long gone and the fragile present, and slowly, gently, let the rhythm of this story ease. No longer do flames roar or wings thunder. No longer do swamps stretch endlessly into the horizon. Instead there is only this, your breath steady and sufficient, the quiet whisper of life's continuity. The Carboniferous taught us that atmospheres can rise and fall, that giants can grow and vanish, that forests can build the sky, and fungi can dismantle it. But it also taught us that life endures, reshaping itself with every shift. Let the imagery soften. The dragonflies fold their wings, the forests sink into the dark, the fires fade into embers. All that remains is the hush of oxygen moving in and out, carrying you gently toward rest. The breath we inhale tonight is not extraordinary, yet in its ordinariness lies its gift. It is enough. It sustains. It connects us to a world of titans and a world of our own making, and it will carry us into tomorrow. Breathe, rest. The story is complete. Subscribe to my channel for more bedtime stories and science.